There is renewed scrutiny today on Canada's gun laws following a string of shootings in Toronto this past weekend. 17 people were left injured in 14 separate shootings. In response, police resources have been beefed up around the city. But Mayor John Tory is calling for stricter gun control and tougher sentences for gun-related crime. So, will the federal government heed this call? Earlier this afternoon, I spoke with the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Ralph Goodale. Thank you very much for joining us today. You made an announcement on ways to combat child exploitation today, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. First, I want to ask you about some events that unfolded in Toronto this weekend, and a number of people in Toronto, 17 people who were shot and wounded in the city. Earlier today at your news conference, you outlined the measures that your government has brought forward in ways to stop this kind of violence. There's Bill C-71, more money for police, yet we still keep seeing incidents like this, and this weekend alone, again, in Toronto, 17 people were shot. Is it time for a handgun ban in this country?
Well, as you know, Bill Blair, my colleague that shares some of the duties in public safety, has been consulting with Canadians extensively on that topic and has made a number of recommendations. We are weighing all of that very carefully, taking into account the steps that have been taken with background checks and better record keeping and license verification and so forth, the investment in guns and gangs to deal more effectively with firearms that are in dangerous or crime situations. But obviously, we're taking a very careful look at what else needs to be done as well, as jurisdictions around the world are doing. And very shortly, with the election coming up, we will have the opportunity to present ideas to Canadians, as other political parties will. And Canadians will have the democratic right to make a choice based on the public safety proposals and obviously other issues in an election campaign. But they'll have an opportunity to make a judgment on which platform they think is the most sensible.
So you're waiting until the election campaign to make an announcement about something that the Mayor of Toronto has been calling for months, something that he sees and he thinks will save lives. You guys are waiting into the election campaign as to whether you're going to announce something or not?
Well, in terms of actually being able to take the action, that would require legislative measures. So obviously Parliament needs to be in session, and that will not happen until after an election is called. So after an election is over. So it's appropriate for the political parties to lay out for Canadians where they would go with this particular issue and their ideas for how best to deal with it.
Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale says stricter firearm laws should be a topic Canadians can vote on in the fall election. More than a dozen people were injured in Toronto over the weekend in 14 separate shootings. The mayors of Toronto and Montreal have both called for a ban on handguns. But would Canadian voters agree? It's time to bring in the power panel in Vancouver. Former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stockwell Day, commentator and columnist Tiffany Gooch is in Toronto, and here with me in studio in Ottawa, political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin. Stockwell, let's start with you. Is a handgun ban a winning or losing topic for federal parties?
Well, if you're just talking politically, there will be some regions of the country, and maybe in Toronto, where people will respond to that. I mean, 17 people shot on the weekend in Toronto. It's just, and this isn't a first time, of course, for gun violence in Toronto. It seems to be focusing there for various reasons. I think some of the things that Minister Goodale is proposing may have some effect if they're really focused. For instance, stopping illegal handguns coming in across the border. That's a focused attempt there. Looking at the actual regions of the city and at the people who are affected. The studies that have come out, once again, after tragic shootings in the U.S. this weekend, show that these are almost 100%, not quite, young men who've gone through emotional trauma as young people. There are groups and there are organizations that can reach out in a preventative way for those type of emerging realities. But we've got to look at the fact and say, is a ban on handguns, which would be largely unenforceable, is that going to stop bad people from getting guns illegally as they are now? This is the illegal acquisition of firearms that we're talking about.
Tiffany, I want to ask that same question to you. How does this factor into a federal election campaign?
So I think we often find ourselves in debates around gun control when we're in an emotional uproar after something's taken place, or sort of at times where we're seeing something in the U.S. And I think that it's always good for us to have a more long-term, robust conversation about what we can be doing better. Canada's been on a slow but steady pace toward getting to better gun control, and I think that it was always alluded to that handguns and assault rifles and those sorts of pieces would be and could be next. The only piece I would say is it's really difficult to control this debate. We definitely have those that have more money and can put more money into campaigns, and so when we end up in this debate, it often can be overtaken by the lobbies that have a vested interest, and it just so happens that those that are really fighting for gun control normally aren't able to come to that. So it just requires political will, and my hope would be that all parties would be looking for the best ways to close loopholes and figure out how to work with municipalities to make that happen.
Françoise, Jack Layton called for a handgun ban back in 2008, but the political will wasn't there at that time to get to that point. Could the increasing violence in places like Toronto, what we saw over the weekend, could that make this a more urgent issue in some of those vote-rich communities?
I do think it will be, and I think it's not just Toronto. I look here in Ottawa. I grew up in this region, and pretty much every week we hear of some violence, gang-related events in all the big cities, Montreal, Vancouver. There's problems. So it's going to be an issue definitely during the campaign. The solution is another problem. Mm-hmm. Yes, it takes political will, but at the same time, it takes, I'd say, level-headed political will, not just playing on emotions and on actually raw emotions. We all saw what happened after Polytechnique and the Liberals going with the long gun registry and so on. And I mean, for 10 years and more, it's been fought by conservatives, by a lot of people who still, even people in my own caucus at the time, were not necessarily agreeing. I was the justice critic at the time when we reviewed the legislation from Stephen Harper, heard tons of stories. My jury is still out on ban and if it's still the right way to get rid of a problem. I do believe that border, emergency, gang criminal actions in cities, how do we address all that? Those are the real questions, not just, we wake up one day and we say, we ban all those guns. Boy, pass the legislation, Katie. I'm sure the next week it will have zero bearing on those gang members and how they acquired those guns. So I think we're due to have a more adult conversation about the whole issue.
Stockwell, whether people think that this is the route to go, whether the argument is, okay, this is something that could actually help, or whether this is people who are illegally bringing guns into the country anyway, so how is that going to really address this issue? If the government is planning to do something, like we heard from Ralph Goodale today in his interview with us, he talked about how this is going to be something they're going to announce during the election campaign. If this has been an issue that's been ongoing with big city mayors, like the mayor of Toronto, the mayor of Montreal, saying, okay, we need a handgun ban, what is the point? Is it problematic that they're waiting until the election campaign to make an announcement like that?
Well, it is problematic because it gives that whiff of just doing this for political expediency, and where you see millions and millions of dollars being thrown around the country in a widespread way, when if there was more focus on some particular areas, you could actually see some results. One inconvenient truth that people don't like is the only city in the last 50 years in North America that saw a significant reduction, very significant, in gun crime and gun shootings and gun death was the city of New York. And that was when Mayor Giuliani got a very clear program of searching people and being aggressive on the streets about looking for guns. Now that becomes politically incorrect, and you have to be careful that you're not profiling. But letting illegal gun owners know that they have a significant chance of being searched and found in possession of an illegal firearm has some effect. And along with the social approaches that should be taken, There's some technology that's really coming forth right now. As a matter of fact, being transparent here, I'm advising a company that has developed a sensor capability that an officer who has the equipment can actually see if somebody's carrying a firearm under their shirt or in their pocket, or in fact somebody, as happened in Toronto, entering a bar. If you had this set up, you would actually see it light up on a screen. Then again, you run into these politically correct issues that you have to be careful of in terms of privacy. But there are ways to reduce it. It's just a matter of having the will to do it and not doing a widespread program, going after sport shooters in northern Manitoba or Inuvik in terms of trying to stop this. Focus on the real problem. Headway can be made.
Tiffany, really quickly, last question to you. You're in Toronto right now. Is there the political will there on the ground to bring in change?
Absolutely. I think that the largest movements that we're seeing right now are coming based out of Toronto from many different sides, whether it's women's groups that are fighting against domestic violence and entering this debate, or across the board, gun coalitions. I think that there's definitely a lot of appetite in Toronto for some level of change, and we'll see what's being listened to in the coming months.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.